Hello, and welcome back to the Midlife by Design podcast. I'm your host, Lisai. And in today's episode, we dive into finding that spark again in midlife. How do you shake that feeling of malaise or dis-ease or just this feeling of something's not right? Using your human design authority can help. All right, let's get into it. So, malaise, it's this feeling of just blah, of ick, of like your skin doesn't quite feel right, like you don't fit into it the way you used to. Everything looks on the outside maybe like it should be fine, and it's not. Things might be foggy. You might have this feeling that you're craving change, but you just don't know what changes or how it's going to change or which end is up. And I find that the more women I talk to going through this phase of life, this is a very common experience for them. Decision making can even be on autopilot, where you're just making decisions in the same way that you always have, or based solely on the circumstances of your life without really paying attention to what might be this inner calling or this nudge. It's my feeling that all of these symptoms, so to speak, of midlife, this feeling of ick, this feeling of just something's got to change, it's all there for a reason. It really is a time when we need to shake things up. So there is another way, and that's what I want to talk about today. It goes back to your human design authority. And human design is, again, a system for self-awareness. And the authority component of human design, I think, is one of the biggest game changers in the whole system. For me, it is what has made the most difference in my life. And I think for a lot of people, it's one of the components that really has the power to change your life, to transform it completely. Authority is your decision-making mechanism, and it's based in your body, which is very different to what we have been taught in the past. We've been taught to make very logical decisions. Logic is something that is revered in our society. Making logical decisions does not mean listening to your gut, for example. It means taking time to really think things out and write your pros and cons list and et cetera, et cetera. But that's not actually the wisdom that human design has to share. Human design says it's not about getting stuck up here in the feedback loop of your mind, but it's rather tuning into what your body is telling you. When I learned what my authority was, I felt like it was some crazy joke, because in my design, I have a lot of energy that says, do it now. Like, cannonball. When I was an educator, I used to call myself the cannonball educator, because it was just jump in and figure it out. And a lot of the way I function still aligns with the kind of do it now energy. However, what I learned is that I am an emotional authority. And essentially what that means is I'm designed to take my time in making decisions. I think if I had known that, I would have, one, been much kinder to myself with my tendency to avoid making decisions or procrastinate with making decisions. And I would also have probably made some different decisions known. So now that I know better, I can do better. In human design, there are 7 different types of authorities. And essentially, those are decision-making processes. I'm going to go through those for you right now. And if you don't have your chart, you can pull it up on my website, which is Lisai, LORILISAI.com. And you can go to get your chart and put in your birth information. You'll need your birthday, your birth time, your birth location, and it'll pop out a chart for you. And next to the chart will give you your authority. It's good to know what your authority is. And it's also great to know this about your loved ones. So the emotional authority is the first authority. And when I say the first, I mean that because it's a hierarchy. If you have your emotional solar plexus defined or colored in your chart, then you will be an emotional authority. And that's at least half the world. It's interesting. I'm going to give you rough percentages for each of the authorities. And they really are rough because our population is expanding. And so the numbers are changing over time. So it's at least half the world at this point that has the emotional authority. And essentially what this means is that we need to take time to make decisions. We are designed to take time to really feel into a decision. For example, if you are facing a job decision, then you want to leave yourself time to experience what's called your emotional wave. As an emotional being with the defined emotional solar plexus, you're going to have highs and lows. And you may have just one emotional wave, or you may have multiple emotional waves. Essentially, what you're doing by giving yourself time is allowing yourself to feel the highs. So maybe this new job came on the scene and it seemed really exciting and everything looks good on paper, and you get the interview and things feel really good. And you're still in that emotional high, feeling great. You still want to leave yourself time. You don't want to, in that moment, say, yes, I'll take the job. And pro tip for emotional authorities, words that you've got to learn to be part of your lexicon are, this sounds great. Let me get back to you. Using that phrase with friends, family, coworkers, whatever, is a great way to put a pin in it and allow you to honor that emotional authority. So you're at this high, going back to the job example, and you're really excited. The interview has gone well. You decide to sleep on it. The next morning you wake up and your best friend sends you a text and says, hey, I just heard something about the company that you're interviewing for. I'm not really sure if they are as solid as you think. It just seems like they might be having some problems. So you might want to do a little research into that. And that leads you down a rabbit hole. And maybe the company isn't as strong as you thought it was. So you follow up with the powers that be and they explain how they're working their way out of it or whatever. This example is just serving to show you that it's time for more information to come into your awareness. And how does it make you feel? Essentially, at the end of the day, it needs to be, how do you really feel about the decision? But it can't be made in the throes of real excitement. And it can't be made in the throes of the opposite, like this feeling of sadness or this low. It has to be in sort of a more neutral place. That's what you're looking for. You want to come to neutrality. So that's the emotional authority. The next authority is the sacral authority, and that's the second square up from the bottom of the chart. And the sacral center is all about trusting your gut. This is advice that we've heard for eons. So many times people have said, well, trust your gut. And it's actually only true for generators and manifesting generators, because those are the ones who have their sacral defined, which is 70% of the population, those two types together. However, even generators and manifesting generators, not everybody has the sacral authority. You might have your sacral defined, but it's not the one that gets the last say. So that's what I mean by the hierarchy. It's like If you're an emotional generator or manifesting generator, then yes, you're going to get a gut instinct. Your gut is going to tell you how it feels about something, but it's not where you should go until you give yourself time for things to unfold. The sacral authority is really about that gut instinct, and it feels like a flush. It feels like this rush of excitement. Your sacral is roughly 2 inches above your navel. And you think about this bubbly feeling coming up from it and moving upward. That's a yes. Those indications are a yes. You might even find yourself moving forward, moving literally toward the thing, leaning in. Those are indications of a yes. Versus the opposite would be a drop in your gut, a feeling of emptiness, a feeling of like kathunk. I always think of that sound when I'm thinking about a sacral no. That can be a real indicator of like, the other thing is, as a generator, you'll notice through this podcast that I make a lot of generator sounds, things like or if you're thinking about your facial expressions like a frown or moving back, you literally, your body moves away from the thing. Those are no's. And we joke about it. And when we're younger, it can be something that is conditioned out of us when our parents say, don't say, say yes. Don't say, say no, as a more polite way to express what you're feeling. However, those uh-huhs and uh-uhs and ugh and ooh, those are sacral sounds. They are telling you something. It is your body communicating with you, your sacral coming right out your throat. So allow for that and listen to it. Trust it. One caveat I just want to mention about the sacral response and the sacral authority is when you're making decisions as a sacral, it's in the moment. You know what is right for you in that moment. Of course, it could change. You are human, circumstances change, things can change. So if you're making a big decision, let's say you're purchasing a new house or you're thinking about moving and you're looking at a number of different houses and you walk into the first house and it looks pretty, but you don't really feel excitement. And then you walk into the second house and you get the pull. It's immediate, like, wow, like, ooh, like this is exciting. That's a yes. However, you're about to make a significant investment. So I think it's great practice for you to come back the next day, if possible, and give it another try. Like, see, does your sacral respond the same way? And if it does, that's just more confirmation for you. And I think the more that you practice with this type of authority and the more that you build trust with your gut, the more you're going to be able to make the call in the moment and really trust that that is true and right for you. This approach to coming back the next day and running it through your sacral again, it's really just more for you to help yourself build that trust. That's just something to kind of to understand about your authority. So if you are a splenic authority, it's a very similar authority to the sacral in that it speaks in the moment. Your splenic authority will be yours if you do not have a defined sacral or a defined solar plexus, but your spleen is defined, which is, if you're looking at your chart, the triangle on the lower left facing in toward the sacral. So if that is colored in, which is true for about the splenic authority is about 10%-ish of the population, then what you need to do is follow your intuition. And this is where building a really strong relationship with your intuition is incredibly important. Even if you're a sacral or an emotional who has the splenic center defined, it's important to take note of how your intuition speaks to you. For some people, it will come in as images. Intuition speaks to us in the clairs, like clairs, clairs like clairaudient or clairvoyant or claircognizant. You might notice that you see images of things. You might notice that you hear things. You might notice that you just know things and you can't necessarily explain it. You may very well not be able to put it into words, but it's just this deep knowing, this intuition. The splenic authority is the oldest. It's that energy of keeping us safe. And so there's always this flavor of what is my intuition telling me that's going to keep me safe? And you want to follow that. That is part of your purpose here. I would encourage you to build a relationship with that intuition. The intuition speaks in the moment. It's quiet. You may get a flash of an image. You may get the tiniest whisper. It's really important for you to trust that and move forward on it, because the more that you ignore it, the quieter it will become. If you've been ignoring your intuition for a long time, I would just suggest that you start practicing with it again. Encourage it to speak to you. Promise that you will follow its wisdom and then really follow through. And I'll give you some exercises later on in the episode for things that you can do to kind of practice strengthening this authority muscle. So the next authority is the ego. And if you're looking at the chart, that is the little triangle that's above the emotional solar plexus and the sacral, kind of in between. And this is the ego or the heart. And roughly 1% of the population has this authority. They will either be manifestors or projectors. And ego authorities are really here to follow your desires, follow your heart. Literally, what do you want? One of the major pieces of conditioning with ego authorities is unraveling this idea of selfishness and, well, I should be trying to do what other people want to do because I can flex or whatever. And if you have an ego authority, it's super important, not only for you, but also for the other people affected by your decisions, for you to follow your desires. So what is best for you and what you truly desire, what is on your heart, that's best for everybody involved. Stay focused on that and try to remember that when you're making your decisions. You're doing what's right for you as well as for everyone involved. Self-projected is the next authority. And for your self-projected people, which are roughly 1% of the population as well, you are going to see on your chart the middle diamond will be defined or colored in, and it'll be connected to the throat, which is the square right above it. Self-projected people are basically taking the identity center, which is that triangle. It's the center for ourself, who we are, and talking it out. They're bringing it up through their throat and into reality. So this idea of like aligning with who you are is so important, and using your voice to make decisions is so important. So self-projected, these are projectors, are really going to need to use their voice when they're making decisions, talking things out and seeing like, how does it sound? Does this sound like me? Does this really resonate with who I am? Those are the kinds of questions that you can ask yourself when you're processing a decision. There's another kind of projector that only has the next authority, and that's called a mental projector. Again, if you're looking at the chart, this is when you have a defined throat that square toward the top of the chart, connected directly to the ajna or the mind, which is the triangle facing down toward the throat. Those two are connected. And mental projectors are, again, around 1% of the population. It's crucial for them to also talk it out. They need to use a sounding board, and self-projected projectors really could use a sounding board as well. And what I mean by sounding board is somebody to talk to who will mirror things back to you without giving their opinion. They're simply helping you to hear back what you said. For example, if you're making a decision about a child care facility and you've got a number of different options, you've talked to a number of them and you're down to two, you talk to a trusted parent friend who you can express it to, and then they can just listen and reflect back to you. Okay, well, I heard you say this about this childcare facility, and then I heard you say this about the other one. And what does that sound like to you? Allowing that to be reflected back to them as a mental projector will allow them to hear it again in a different way and process it. So that sounding board environment and an environment is super important. So the sounding board is great for self-projected projectors and mental projectors. So the self-projected projectors can use that sounding board talking about what aligns with who they are as a person and get that reflection back and make a decision. A mental projector is going to want to use that sounding board, get that reflection back, and also be in an environment that feels really supportive to them in order to make the best decisions. This can be tricky, and it's important as a mental projector to know this about yourself. One of my sons is a mental projector, and I try to encourage him to talk things out. When he's by himself, he's always done this naturally. He would be outside shooting baskets and having a full-on conversation with himself, talking it out, working through things, processing, does a lot of processing in the shower. It's funny, I had the conversation with my partner about, should we be worried? Is this weird? And when I learned about human design, it just clicked. I understood he was using something that came intuitively to him. And for us to then be able to encourage him to continue doing that, help to normalize it, and really just empowers him further to be able to use that as his authority. So knowing how your kids are designed to make decisions can be a game changer for how you parent them as well. And then the last authority is called the lunar authority. Again, about 1%, because this authority is specific to reflectors only, who are only about 1% of the population. So lunar authority is about taking a lunar cycle to make a decision. It's sort of like the idea of the emotional authority times 10, because they're taking a full month. Reflectors, when you look at your chart, if none of your centers are colored in, then you are a reflector. And essentially what that means is you are taking in and amplifying other people's energy. So making decisions can be challenging because you are constantly being conditioned and being influenced by what other people are going through and what other people are feeling and experiencing. So the idea of giving yourself a lunar cycle is about allowing yourself time to just experience all of the things over time, and then kind of take a step back and say, okay, what feels right here? What do I sense is the right thing for me? And as a reflector, you're a little bit of all of the authorities. As a reflector, you're a little bit of all of the energy types because you are reflecting them all. So you can use any of these techniques throughout that time. And I like to encourage reflectors to look for patterns. If you are making a big decision and you're really excited about something, just giving yourself time and seeing if that excitement sticks with you over time. It may not be consistent throughout the entire month, but just looking for the patterns of how you're feeling about it, how it's landing with you, how it's sitting with you over time. So these are the 7 different authorities and how they work. And I just want you to note the body's involvement in this whole thing. So, for example, the emotional authority, people have historically been encouraged to stuff down emotions and not make a decision based on your emotions. And it's not really about stuffing them down, it's about feeling them through. So, sure, you shouldn't be making a decision in the heat of the moment. However, you should be allowing yourself to feel that heat through and through deeply, and then just let it go and see where the dust settles. That's sort of the idea. So, we're in midlife, and as midlife mamas, we have these identity shifts happening. We are very much becoming totally different versions of ourselves. We're navigating change and sort of by necessity. And there are a lot of decisions that end up needing to be made in this period of our life. And I'm very much encouraging you to lean on your authority, to start experimenting with it. Our kids are growing up. We're no longer needed in the same way that we used to. How do we fill that gap? There's a decision point. Like, what am I going to do? How do I get to redefine myself? What is pulling me toward it? What do I feel drawn to? And how do I make a decision to actually follow that? Use your authority, honor your authority. And above all else, this is an experiment. So I just want to remind you of that again and encourage you to start to play around with it. So, in that vein, I have a little exercise here that you can try to help you see how you may or may not have been using your authority already in your life. And that is a journal exercise. I'll put this in the show notes, but if you are watching on YouTube, you can pause and take a minute to grab your journal if you want to do the journal exercise right now. And what I'd like you to do is think of a few times when you made an important decision in your life. I think back to when I decided to have children. And for quite a long time, I was part of the NBC at my school where I worked, NBC meaning No Babies Club, because I didn't really think I was ever going to have kids. And then I did. And I'm so glad I did. And in looking back on it, I can see how my emotional authority played a part, even though I didn't know that that's what I was doing at the time. So, what I want you to do is think about a few different times when you made an important decision, and then how did it turn out? Maybe you're thinking of a time when you made a decision that you wish you had gone another way. Maybe you're thinking of a decision that worked out really well. Try to choose one of each. And write about, if you can remember well enough, the process of making that decision. Like, what brought you to that decision? Why did you make it that way? Was it a pros and cons list? Was it over time? Was it a series of events that happened that sort of funneled you into that decision? And I want you to just reflect on, now that you know what your authority is, whether or not you instinctively used your authority or not. If you're a sacral, for example, a sacral authority, and you made a decision and didn't follow your gut, how did that feel? What did that process look like for you? If you're a splenic authority, for example, and your intuition told you something and you went with it, How did that feel? How did it turn out? I want to say that using your authority does not guarantee that everything is going to be perfect. I think I think that there's maybe a misconception about that that's really important to highlight. However, the reason I encourage you to use your authority is because it's something that you can experiment with as a new way of making decisions and see if it does work out better. See if you feel better about the way things land. Whatever decision you make with your authority is the decision that you're meant to experience in this lifetime. It could end up leading you down this road that ends up being difficult, that things are still challenging you. And that might be part of what you're meant to do. It's not this pass for ease when you use your authority. It's more about making a decision that's right for you and right for the path that your soul has chosen and the experiences that you came here to experience. So I want to just wrap up with a practical tip for using your authority that you can start experimenting right away. So I love food. I'm a Cancer sun, Cancer moon, and I love using food as a way to experiment with things in human design. So let's use food as an example and using your authority with food. If you're an emotional authority, what I want you to try is looking at menus before you go to a restaurant. So when it's time to go out to eat, look at the menu and see what looks good, see what is speaking to you. And then when you get there, you'll have had like a little bit of time to kind of have it in your mind, and then you can decide. Another workaround would be being the last person to go, but given that half of the world is an emotional, like not everybody's going to get to go last. So this is why I love the idea of looking at a menu before you go to the restaurant. If you're a sacral, however, don't look at the menu, just show up and go with what your gut tells you. Like what excites you? What do you look at the menu and you're like, "Ooh, that sounds good. Yeah, get that. Get that." If you are a splenic, go with your first instinct. You're reading the menu, bam, you get an instinct, that's it. And then just put the menu down. Don't read through everything else. Just go with the first thing that hits. If you are an ego authority, what do you really want? Simple as that. What do you really want? What is just on your heart? Go with that. Self-projected, say it out loud and listen to if it aligns with you. So, for example, if you are an athlete, does the fried chicken and French fries really sound good to you? Maybe it's exactly what your body needs. Maybe you just ran a marathon and you need to carbo load. However, maybe not. Maybe you're cutting and that doesn't sound good to you. So, reading the menu out loud and just listening to it. And you can even talk with like, "Hey, what are you getting?" And you can say, "This is what I'm thinking." Have them say it back to you. See if it sounds good. Mental projected, similar, reading it out loud, seeing if it sounds good to you. Also, choosing a restaurant where the vibe is good for you. That'll be important. That is also very important for a lunar authority. So if you're a reflector, looking at the menu and making reservations well in advance. So you give yourself plenty of time before you even land in the restaurant, and choose that restaurant, not just for the menu, but also for the vibe. And when you go, then you'll again have had time, similar to the emotional authority. So take these for a test drive, and I would love, love, love to hear back from you. Shoot me a message on Instagram or leave a comment on YouTube and just let me know, how's the experiment going? Have you tried using your authority before? How has it worked for you? How has it not? I would love to hear from you. So, in this episode, we've talked about your authority and how it is in your body. Listen to its wisdom, experiment with it, and then notice. Just take notice of what happened when you used your authority. Take notice. Is it better than the way you were making decisions before? Has it helped to get you out of your funk? Has it shaken things up or allowed for you to honor your body in a different way and honor your growth in this midlife phase of your life in a different way? Really notice that awareness is such a big part of this human experience. I encourage you to download your free chart if you haven't already on my website, and check out the free HD guide, a free human design guide that will take you through your type strategy and authority. Just the basics to get you started, those are great. And there's more information there about your authority or reminders in case you'd like to have it in written form. I know I do. Another thing I'd love for you to check out is I have a blog post on what does the authority actually feel like in your body for each of the authorities, where I just go into a little more depth there. So if you're looking for more information, you can find it there, and I'll leave that in the show notes. So please feel free to reconnect with me on Instagram, because I would love to hear how this authority experiment is going for you. And please tune in to the next episode. I'll be launching a series on types, and specifically starting with manifestors, looking at what is it like to live as a midlife manifestor mama. So thank you so much for tuning in. And as I sign off, I wish you the strength to let your baggage go, the inspiration to remember who the fuck you are, and the courage to be who you came here to be.